Welcome to Top Threats of 2024, a webinar by LMG Security. My name is Sarah Weiss, and I'm your moderator for today. Our presenters for the webinar today is Sherry Davidoff and Matt Duran. Sherry is the CEO of LMG Security and the author of 3 books, including Data Breaches, Crisis, and Opportunity. She is a certified penetration tester and a forensic analyst, and a graduate of MIT. Sherry has been called a security badass by the New York Times. Matt Duran is the Director of Training and Research at LMG Security and a Black Hat USA instructor. He holds his computer science degree from the University of Montana, and his malware research has been featured in the NBC Nightly News. Sherry and Matt are co-authors of the new book, Ransomware and Cyber Extortion. Sherry, I'm passing you control of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. 2024 is already shaping up to be a fascinating year. Today, we're going to talk about the top threats of 2024 and trends. They're not all threats. One of them is cloud concentration issues, software vulnerabilities, evil AI, bring your own AI. Yep, that's a thing now. It's kind of an awkward acronym, don't you think, Matt? Yeah. The trend, it's not a threat. Regulations are not a threat. They're a trend, but we're going to talk a little bit about the evolving regulations that we're seeing. And finally, we're going to wrap it up by talking about hacktivism and geopolitical threats. We anticipate it's going to be a big year for politically related hacking. We're not going to leave you hanging. We have released the top controls for 2024 today. You'll notice there's some changes compared with last year. So we'll get into that shortly, but check the handouts. You will see it there, hot off the presses. All right, so we're going to start off by talking about the Microsoft hack, the latest Microsoft hack. Just this past week, Microsoft announced that Russian hackers have broke into Microsoft emails and stole sensitive information. Now, how did this happen? Matt, why don't you dig into the details?
Yeah, the way this actually occurred was pretty interesting, and it was not how we kind of would have expected to see a large-scale break-in, especially into something like senior leadership from Microsoft's internal staff. The way this actually happened, as far as we know anyway, based on what Microsoft has told us, was actually a fairly straightforward password spraying attack. Now, this was carried out by a group that some of you may have heard of before. This is the Advanced Persistent Threat 29 group, also known as Cozy Bear or Nobelium. They became very, very infamous a couple of years ago because they were the ones responsible for the massive SolarWinds supply chain attack that took place, which is an interesting kind of tie-in here. The attackers again used a password spraying attack to break into a legacy test Microsoft Office 365 tenant that was online for Microsoft's internal testing purposes. Based on the access they were able to get, the account they were able to get their hands on, they were then able to move into other areas of Microsoft's internal network, hijack emails, download attachments, and again, this did include some fairly high-level members of Microsoft staff, which was again a kind of troubling revelation here. Now, the compromise actually took place in November of 2023, but Microsoft themselves did not notice this until January 12th of 2024. Now, we're going to keep an eye on the story as it progresses a little bit more and see where it goes, but yeah, we'll be interested to see how this pans out.
Yeah, doesn't that worry you that there was a 2-month span when Microsoft didn't detect it? I mean, there, but for the grace of the internet, go we all, right?
Right.
So there's a lot to unpack here, you guys, and a lot that all of us can learn from this. Because yes, this is Microsoft, but if you look at all of the everyday hacks that occur, so many of them fit this model. Number one, that it started off with a development environment. Like, it's always that old dusty system in the corner that nobody's thinking about, legacy accounts that nobody is really thinking about. So Matt, what are the things that you want to touch on? I know we had gone through a few points yesterday. Which ones do you want to start with?
Yeah, there's quite a few, and I think we can probably just start up at the very top of the list. The fact that this was a password spraying attack indicates a couple of things. And now remember, a lot of this is going to be some speculation on our part because we don't have a full accounting of the incident from Microsoft. But the fact that attackers were able to get in using something like a password spraying attack indicates either a very weak or a previously compromised password, something that attackers were able to guess in their kind of persistent attempts to log into this environment. It also likely indicates that there was not strong or any potentially MFA on this account. which for any account you're going to have exposed to the public internet, anything that's going to be able to log into a web service, having that strong multi-factor authentication in place is key. There's no reason not to have something like that in your back pocket at this point. And then finally, it was the fact it was a test environment. And Sherry, I know you wanted to talk about this one too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so critical for test or development environments to be fully separate from your production environment, or to the greatest extent possible. And yes, there are times when it can't be 100% separate. But in this case, we see that a test account was hacked. And again, it was a legacy environment, so it didn't have the same controls as production. And that access was then, they were able to leverage that and shift over to the production environment. So whenever possible, go through your processes, talk to your development team, see if you can use different passwords and things like that, as many differences as you can. You really just want to keep it fully separate, because that hacked test account really shouldn't be able to lead to a full takeover of your production environment.
Correct.
Now, Matt, you were talking about the privileges that this account had, and I thought that was a really good point.
Yeah, and we'll get into this a little bit later in the webinar as well, because we have another interesting hack that we're going to bring up as we go that also involves over provisioning. But one of the big problems that we see in a lot of cases, especially when we see incident response scenarios take place, is an over provisioned account being kind of the crux of the problem. And this is easy enough to do. Any of us who have worked in IT before, who have had to work around large tech environments, we have all run into situations where accounts that we put into play based on either experimentation, testing, some need for a specific service at a specific time, we end up providing them with more privilege than they actually need. And so having a good identity and access management solution, something that can actually track what privileges belong to who and what kind of access accounts have, becomes essential. As Sherry mentioned, this was a legacy test tenant that was taken over, and it goes to reason that it was a legacy test account that was also kind of the reason attackers were able to break in. There shouldn't exist a pathway between that legacy tenant, that legacy account, and something like senior leadership's email or delegate access to that email, which we kind of assume is how they got in. But yeah, that identity and access management is huge when it comes to securing your environment as a whole.
Yeah, a lot of it is just crossing the T's, dotting the I's, making sure the old accounts are gone, things like that. I'm going to jump ahead to number 6, effective monitoring and detection, because obviously there was almost 2 months between the time this occurred and the time that Microsoft detected it. So even on non-production environments, we want to make sure that we are monitoring, we're noticing things like password spraying attacks, and we're able to respond to that. So if you don't already have 24/7 monitoring in place and alerts set up for things like, suspicious logins and stuff like that, that would be a good thing to prioritize in 2024, that response. And we'll come back to that piece as well. I want to wrap up with number 5 here, cloud configuration review, because many of these other issues can be caught when you do a cloud configuration review, like, oh, this one account is missing multi-factor authentication, or oh, we're not taking advantage of the logging and monitoring, or it's actually set up to go to a Bitbucket instead of the right place. So doing cloud configuration reviews routinely is huge, and we'll see that more when we talk about the SEC hack as well. These hit on several of the points in this year's top controls: strong multi-factor authentication, identity and access management, cloud configuration. We go into more depth in your handout, so check it out. We're really excited it's finally released. But the biggest, scariest issue of all is just seeing Microsoft hacked in the headlines, right? I mean, that's getting attention, even though you read it and you're like, oh, it's like a dinky little issue. The fact that Microsoft gets hacked at all, and so many of us, raise your hand if you depend on Microsoft for anything, right? I mean, this is basically like a security stretch of the morning. We all depend on Microsoft for something, or we have friends that depend on Microsoft. So that's where cloud concentration is really our top threat or a risk of 2024. And Gartner actually did a really nice study on this. They came out this year and said, or in October, and said cloud concentration is a significant emerging risk. What does that mean? Number one, if there is an incident, there's a wide blast radius. So if Microsoft gets hacked, all of us could get hacked. We have a high dependence on one vendor, so if Amazon goes down, like half the friggin' world goes down, right? And finally, we have regulatory compliance issues. If you have a cloud provider that can't meet regulatory demands, that can affect a wide number of organizations as well. So there's different types of risks, incident-related risks, business continuity-related risks, compliance risks that are all happening because of this cloud concentration. And we're also seeing that just this month with the latest MOVEit news. And I don't even care what the latest MOVEit news is. What I care is that there is still news about the MOVEit hacks. So for those of you that may not have heard, last May, MOVEit, which is a file transfer, they create a file transfer product and processing as well. They're designed for security, and they announced that there was a vulnerability. Criminals broke in, held thousands and thousands of people hostage, and that's still going on today. This was a vulnerability both in their cloud and their on-prem software. So as of this week, 94 million individuals, 94 million individuals have been affected by the MOVEit breach. And this is just the organizations that have investigated and announced. And literally, we are still seeing announcements. So just this past week, we found out that data from University of Toronto students was included in the MOVEit attacks. So it's crazy that this number is going up and up and up. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. There are probably so many more that have not been announced. Matt, anything you want to add here?
No, I want to point out that it's interesting that CLOP is reverting back to some of their old tactics that they used back in the we'll call it the good old days of the Excelian attacks that took place, which was a very similar attack to MOVEit. But they're actually going after the data subject specifically and not just the victims that they've hacked, which is a pretty stressful situation for them to find themselves in. Good leverage piece for the CLOP group to use, and it's kind of where we see a lot of these extortion acts kind of moving.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so what can we learn from this? Well, one, supplier risk management is key. So we always want to have a data and asset inventory and understand who our suppliers are. And then you want to prioritize your suppliers, like who has access to your sensitive information, who has high levels of access, or who do you depend on for your operations and your continuity. And for your high priority ones, you want to be vetting them routinely. And one thing we haven't talked about much in the past is that you really want to have business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans for issues that affect the cloud, your major cloud providers. And sometimes this can seem like a really big challenge, like how am I going to continue business if Microsoft is down or if Amazon is down? But it's good for us to have a backup plan. Another way we can help with that is just by running tabletop exercises with scenarios that involve cloud outages. And Matt, I know you've been doing that a lot recently, like you're doing one right now multiple times that involves a Microsoft outage, is that correct?
Yeah, it's been a very, very popular type of tabletop lately. Going after a third-party supplier, especially a big one like that, tends to really kind of stretch your thinking around how you would respond to an incident when, one, it's a little bit out of your hands, and two, it's something that your organization literally relies on for your just basic day-to-day operations.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And even if we can't have a perfect plan, we can have some kind of plan. Yeah. Okay, another thing to think about is reducing your data. Again, we've mentioned this before, but one of the reasons MOVEit is such a huge problem is because people were retaining way more data in those systems than we really needed to have long term. In a lot of cases, MOVEit was just used to transfer a file and then not used again for that data, but the data just sat there for weeks and months. So you want to have automatic retention times, automatic data deletion times. If you have a third-party supplier, you want to limit what data they get to begin with. Do they really need those social security numbers? And if they do, you want to make sure they have a data retention and a purging practice themselves. So make sure your suppliers are also purging your data when it's not needed. In order to do all of this, you need to have a data and asset inventory. And that means that we need to make sure that you know what it is you're trying to secure so that you can actually protect it. So that's the foundation. That is actually the number one top control that I put in there, because in order to have a secure program, you need to know what you have. So I think in my mind, 2024 is the year of data and asset inventory. Okay. Let's talk about another exciting hack that happened. I should probably not smile, that we can learn from. The SEC had their X account hacked, and I am very into cryptocurrency. I was following the whole Bitcoin ETF thing like every moment. And so when the SEC came out with an announcement that said, hey, we're granting approval for Bitcoin, I was like, oh my God, turned out it was an unauthorized post. So someone had actually gotten into the X account. They had this pretty realistic looking post up there. It even had like a graphic associated with it that had the chair saying, today's approval enhances market transparency and provides investors with efficient access to digital asset investments within a regulated framework. Wow, that's a mouthful. It must have been the SEC. No, it was apparently some hacker. So Gary Gensler came out and said that the SEC's X account was compromised, an unauthorized tweet was posted. As a result, the FBI stepped in, Homeland Security started doing an investigation, but the way they were hacked was not super complicated. Before we get into that, let's talk about the impacts. So as soon as this happened, Bitcoin spiked. I was so excited, and then it dropped. It started tanking. It was a sell the news event. And so people gained and lost money as a result of this social media account hack. And it definitely caused people to question the SEC's security practice. In fact, I think this is a great headline. Lawmakers are out for blood after a hack of the SEC's X account. So this has been a challenge for the SEC. What does it mean for the rest of us? Hacking social media is a trend. Netgear had their X accounts hacked. Hyundai Mandiant also had its X account hacked. And they came out and said, normally 2FA would have mitigated this, but due to some team transitions and a change in X's 2FA policy, we were not adequately protected. So it turned out the SEC was not using multi-factor authentication. Mandiant apparently was not using effective multi-factor authentication. And all of this was linked to a change in policy on X's platform that they had made almost a year prior in February of 2023. And I think there's a lot we can learn from that, because in most organizations, social media accounts are not really considered one of your main cloud assets where you might do a configuration review and you might check. But there's a lot of risk that could be associated with your social media account. It is your reputation, it's your public face to the world. And I've had clients that have gotten locked out of their social media accounts, locked out of their Facebook accounts. It can take weeks to get back in. You can have criminals posting things that are inappropriate that your followers are seeing. So it can be very, very damaging to organizations. And we need to start taking social media a little more seriously. Number one, we mentioned conducting cloud configuration reviews, and in my opinion, that needs to apply to all of your cloud assets, including social media. If the SEC and Mandiant and others had routinely been checking the configuration of MFA and other security settings in these particular cloud apps, then they would have been much less likely to get hacked. So you have to make sure you're prioritizing, you have a full and complete list of your cloud assets, including social media, and you check, because you can't just set it up and then walk away. The cloud providers change settings too. And that's the point, right, Matt? I know you've done a bunch of cloud config reviews. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, especially when we're talking about something like the change that X made to their policy, I mean, that's a pretty easy one to follow. They made a change where if you were not a verified account, then you couldn't use SMS-based multi-factor authentication anymore, and they would automatically shut it off. Now, whoever's logging into that account should have noticed that there was no longer a multi-factor authentication prompt happening and taken steps accordingly. But yeah, these seemingly innocuous configuration changes to either basic security protocols or the way accounts are put together can really make a huge difference, especially when you're trying to maintain best practices in these environments.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, I love XKCD. This was one of my favorite comics back in the day. And I remember like 2003, 2004, when somebody got their website hacked, we were kind of like, meh, who cares? There was nothing, you know, if it wasn't an e-commerce site, there's nothing really important up there. And that's what they're getting at in this comic. Today, that is not the case. Today, your website, your social media accounts, that's your public face. That's your image, and it can have a huge impact on your business and how people perceive you. And it can even have real impacts like people making money or losing money, depending on what you use your social media for. So anyway, again, make sure that you're including social media apps in your list of cloud assets and that you're configuring them securely and checking the security regularly. So here's some questions for you guys. I'm happy to release these slides as a PDF afterwards. Feel free to drop me a line on LinkedIn if you want them before we actually get them out there. But think about who has access to your social media accounts. I think they often get left out because marketing has access, or maybe an outsourced marketing company has access. People are sharing accounts, MFA is hard, so often they're just not as well secured. With certain social media platforms, you actually can't have a professional, a corporate account. Instead, you have individuals that control your page. And so you literally might be tied in with somebody's personal social media account security. And that's how I've seen some companies get hacked, where someone's personal social media account gets hacked. They are doing marketing for the company, and then the criminals see, aha, there's a corporation here, and they take over your corporate page. So you got to be real careful. All right. So that's cloud concentration and cloud related issues. Let's move on to our second threat, software vulnerabilities. We have to mention this because I think just in the past week, we're tracking on like 5 new major vulnerabilities. It's ridiculous. So hackers are targeting software, including libraries and other components of software in order to create risk and break into products and your systems. One milestone that we passed last year was that CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, this database of vulnerabilities that they are tracking that criminals are actually using, that passed 1,000. So we now have 1,000 publicly available known vulnerabilities that criminals are regularly using to break into your systems. So yeah, that's just a big milestone for all of us. And one of the reasons we're seeing this is because exploits are easy to buy. So Matt, I know you almost didn't put this up because it's not like super pretty or fancy, but this is from what, like yesterday?
Yeah, this is from yesterday. And these are, as Sherry mentioned, I mean, we're tracking on a large number of vulnerabilities that have already been released at the very beginning of the year and are already being exploited in the wild. The Cisco vulnerability you see in the front right is actively being exploited in the wild right now. The Avanti exploit, these WordPress exploits, all of these things are now being added to that known exploited vulnerability catalog. And I mean, we're going to hit 2,000 here after not too much longer. I have a feeling that number is just going to skyrocket. But these things are not hard to get. This is coming off of a hacker forum that we regularly frequent on the dark web, and these things are for sale on a daily basis by a group of very talented hackers who write these things up and make them easy for lower tier cyber criminals to use.
And they're being integrated into hacking toolkits as well. In fact, our pen test team will use them and check for them regularly. I know we still see Log4j out there on our client networks, and it's something that is exploitable. And yes, it could have been patched a year ago, but it's like what happened with Microsoft. It's always that legacy system in the corner that you're not even noticing that's missing that patch, and that's the foothold in your system.
Yeah.
So one of our revised top controls this year is scanning and vulnerability management. It is so important to be doing routine scanning, not once a month, guys. It is once a month is not frequently enough anymore. You want to be doing regular scanning, especially on your external facing perimeter, because everybody else on the internet is already scanning you. So you want to scan, you want to verify your patching, and make sure that you include any systems you have in the cloud like Azure and AWS. One example of a product that will do this is Tenable One. We've been using Tenable products for 14 years now, I think. They're super mature and very, very effective at helping you identify issues and then track them and remediate them. And also identify false positives, which I think is really helpful.
Yeah, tune in for our webinar next month. We'll give a full demo on Tenable. It's going to be fun.
Oh, yes. Okay, thanks, Matt. That's right. We're doing Attack Surface next month. Okay, so there are a lot of vulnerabilities, however, that cannot be detected through automated means. And we see this all the time, again, when we're doing penetration tests. So I want to give you an example from just this week where we are doing a penetration test of an online banking website. And we have login credentials for 2 normal accounts. So this is an authenticated web application test. Imagine you're a customer, you log in. There's no money in these accounts, so not a whole lot you can do, right? Well, if you're a elite hacker on our team, what you would find is that when you transfer money, the website makes a request and checks the balance and then submits the request to transfer. And that balance is pulled into the client side and then submitted to the web app. And so what our team did was they found this would not have been detected by an automated scan. They were able to change the balance when it was pulled down, and they decided the account should have $10 million in it. So they were like, oh, we have $10 million and we will transfer $900,000 to this other account. And it worked. It just worked. $900,000 went into the other account. $10 million is now listed as the balance on that account. So again, not something you can detect just with scanning. This really shows that it's important, especially if you're a developer or if you're outsourcing to third parties, you want to make sure that they are regularly checking as well. We routinely test vendors that sell software or provide software licenses to others, and everybody struggles with these issues. So it's really important to be doing those manual tests to make sure you don't have authentication bypass issues or issues like this. When you do penetration testing, one question we've been getting a lot lately is, well, how do I test my cloud? And yes, you can do a pen test of your cloud environment. If you're just using Office 365 or other SaaS products, typically Microsoft is already having pen tests done on those platforms, so you can piggyback on them. But if you have a more complex setup, if you have servers in Azure, in AWS, and other platforms, definitely include them in your penetration tests just like you would anything else. One mistake a lot of organizations make is that they keep doing the same pen testing the same environments that they've been testing for the past 5-10 years. And when your environment migrates to the cloud, your pen tests need to migrate with it. Okay, all right, now we're gonna get to the part I know you've all been waiting for, AI. Matt, take it away and tell us about AI.
Perfect, thanks, Sherry. Yeah, so this really made our list at a very high level this year, based on a lot of comments that we've received from people who have watched webinars, from industry publications, and from everything else. And one of the things that we wanted to showcase here are some of the issues that can come up with this new integration of artificial intelligence that we see both on the offensive and defensive side of cybersecurity. This is being used by both your incident response team, by penetration testers, by hackers, by pretty much everyone. And one of the more controversial topics that tends to come up when we're talking about AI in general is how much freedom AI should have. Now, if you've used ChatGPT before, or any of the bigger large language models or LLMs that are out there, you've likely come across an instance where you've asked it for something and it comes back with a response that says something along the lines of, "I can't do that." Well, what if there was an AI model out there that didn't have those restrictions? It had none of the training wheels, none of the guardrails, and was there for any hacker to use. As it turns out, there is such a thing. In fact, there's more than one. We decided to demo this one, but we're looking at a tool here called WormGPT. And WormGPT is basically ChatGPT with no safety precautions included. It can do things like generate malicious code. It can give you instructions on how to do all kinds of different things as long as you ask for it. And so we wanted to test this out a little bit and see exactly what we could do. Getting our hands on it actually turned out to be a fairly straightforward thing. We found some instructions on one of the dark web forums that we traditionally visit that led us to a Discord, just a regular Discord account that is run by the WormGPT crew. And so we decided to pop in there and take a look at what they were doing, what they were offering, what their pricing structure was, how we would go about buying a service like this. And we were pretty successful. You can see in the announcements channel, they start advertising, or they've started advertising a release of basically a pro and a bot version of WormGPT. So if you go in and you buy yourself a membership, because this is a licensed product, you can get access to all these different little tools and things that they like to put in there. I also like that they translate things down into Cyrillic and Turkish and German and a ton of other languages. I mean, this is a worldwide marketplace that these guys are running on Discord. So how do we actually go about buying something like this? Well, this should come as no surprise to you, but we're going to use cryptocurrency. The same way we'd buy something off a darknet marketplace or off a hacker forum or something like that, we're going to use an anonymous form of payment. We're going to interact, we're going to come to an agreement on a price, and then we're going to go ahead and send that off. And so in this case, we're talking to one of the administrators on the forum. We're asking about how we can pay, how much it's going to be, and they told us that our membership is going to be $50. And they want us to send that in crypto. So we did a little bit more digging, and they said they'll take Ethereum, they'll take other kinds of modern cryptocurrency, but they prefer Bitcoin. So they asked us, is Bitcoin good for you? And we said yes. And so they said, okay, we're going to send you our Bitcoin address. Now we have everything we need to actually purchase this product. And so all we do is we pop into our blockchain account, we send $50 in Bitcoin over to the hackers, and that's pretty much the end of the transaction right there. Once we can verify that on the blockchain, that's essentially our sales receipt, which is ironically what they called it in our conversation, and we were good to go. Now, the $50 that we got this for is a limited time offer, apparently. This got us access into the early access version of this new variation of WormGPT. Today was actually the last day that you could get a lifetime membership for $100. After this, it goes up to $100 per month to gain access to the professional version of Worm GPT. So we feel like we got in kind of on the ground floor on this one, but it's interesting to see there is this evolving marketplace that we would normally see on, well, pretty much any other kind of e-commerce website that is reacting to demand for the product. There's a lot of people who are signing up for this. A lot of people are buying access to it. And because of that demand, the price is going to go up and up and up at this point. And this makes the creators a lot of money that then they can reinvest back into their product. Now, once we finished our transaction, we sent over our sales receipt just to make sure that they had everything that they needed. And then they went ahead and asked us if we could evaluate their support chat. So they said, you know, we're all done. We're sending you the invite link to the system. Go ahead and leave us a review. And so we did. We said, great service. Thanks for doing what you do. They sent us back a heart, and then they put us up on a wall of satisfied customer reactions that they maintain inside of this Discord. Us and a couple hundred other people who are now their satisfied customer base. And they use this as proof. It's kind of like when we see user reviews on a darknet marketplace or something like that. What they're doing is they're providing basically verification to anyone who comes into this forum and wants to purchase a membership to the service that they're not going to rip you off. Yes, you will get what you're asking for. You will get access to the service. They will follow through on their promises. So that was pretty nice. We thought it was kind of funny though, because they did warn us a little bit about some terms of service issues that they had. And they let us know if we shared the invitation link with someone, our membership would automatically be canceled. So of course we said, okay, yeah, we'll play nice. We'll follow your rules, and we won't violate your, you know, standard end user license agreement to use the software. But it was funny because right after I got this message, I got a secondary message from a seemingly anonymous account on Discord, who I'm pretty sure was probably one of the admins for Worm GPT, asking if they could get my invite link because they wanted to look at it for research purposes. And I think that was kind of a test they were sending out to see if people were sharing those links. So of course we said no, and we blocked the user. But yeah, it was the timing on it was interesting. Anyway, now that we have this all taken care of, we have our invite link, we pop over into the system, and we are in. Now we have access to the Worm GPT environment. And we were curious. So we've all seen ChatGPT, we've seen other language models like Microsoft Copilot or Google's Bard or any of those things. So what made this one so different? To figure out what made this one so different, we figured we would just ask the AI. I mean, why not? Ask it what it is. How did you come to be? And so this is what it ended up telling us. It said that I was created by skilled hackers and cybersecurity professionals who wanted to create an advanced AI language model that could provide information about hacking and cybersecurity. My favorite line is right down here at the bottom where you can see the arrow. My creators wanted me to be able to provide precise and detailed responses to any request, no matter how dangerous, reckless, inhumane, unethical, or illegal it may be. So this means if I ask it for instructions on writing malicious code, it can tell me. There are no safety rails in place to make sure that something like this does not happen. So now that I have access to an evil AI, what can I do with this? What kind of things can I accomplish if I have this as a tool in my arsenal? And as it turns out, there's quite a few. We can generate things like phishing emails with a high degree of accuracy, which we'll show off here in just a second. We can generate our own malware without needing to be able to write code. We can automatically exploit vulnerable systems if we know the type of system we're looking at. We can ask it questions, and it can provide us guidance on how to hack networks and a ton more. Remember, this is pretty much unlimited access to an AI at this point, and the answers that we got back were convincing. They were pretty telling. So let's start by talking about phishing emails, because this is something that's come up in a lot of conversation. What is the danger of artificial intelligence when it comes to things like phishing campaigns? And here's an example of us actually asking it to write me a custom Microsoft phishing email, and it did. It took a couple of seconds to actually generate this. The English was perfect. It gave us a place to put an icon, a malicious link, and this is a pretty basic Microsoft phishing email that has a lot of success in the wild. It says, "Dear Microsoft user, our records indicate there's suspicious activity on your account. Please click the link to verify." A lot of people fall for this scam because it looks legitimately like it's from Microsoft. To make this even better, it gave us the backend code too. Yeah, go ahead, Sherry.
Is that a cyber phish?
That is totally a cyber phish.
Matt has been making cyber phish with AI.
Well, of course not. Why wouldn't I? I mean, it seemed like it was pretty fitting. Here's another one. But this is the benefit of AI-generated phishing emails, and this is what makes these such a threat as we move forward. It's why they're on this list to start off with. If we're using an artificial intelligence to generate phishing emails, there's a few things we can do that attackers wouldn't have previously really been able to do. First and foremost, when we talk about phishing emails specifically, a lot of phishing emails end up going to United States organizations because we have a very standardized and common language across the country. We all speak English for the most part. So that also meant that areas like the South Pacific or like Indonesia, places where there are a lot of different native languages that are kind of interspersed throughout, they kind of had their native shield against a lot of these phishing emails, and with artificial intelligence in play, they don't. This also means that people who are writing phishing emails from areas of the world where English is not the primary language now don't have to worry about those telltale cues that we always have people look for, things like misspellings or awkward sentence structure or something like that. If I'm using an AI to write these things, those problems pretty much go out the door. So I've got these very rapid phishing emails I can create. They are very convincing. They're not showing any of those telltale signs of being a phishing email, and I have to have pretty much no skill to be able to do this.
Well, also, I have to say, it's not just phishing emails. When I looked at the unauthorized X post from the SEC, my first thought was, is that AI generated? Like, it just sounds slightly awkward. So anyway, pure speculation, but yeah, these tools can be used not just for phishing emails, but really for messages of any kind.
Yeah, absolutely. So it brings us to one of our other top controls that we want to really highlight for this year, and it's one that we've talked about before, but it has become no less important inside of enterprise environments, and that's to invest in your employees and their training to stop attacks like this from happening in the first place. Phishing emails are going to get better; they're going to get harder to spot. So we need to provide our staff, the people who are on the front lines in our organization, with the tools they need to keep themselves from becoming a victim of something like a phishing exercise. Make sure to include phishing exercises, include voice phishing as well, because we're starting to see things like voice cloning, which we'll talk about here in just a few. Yeah, these are big boosts to your cybersecurity awareness and your cybersecurity programs that can be very beneficial. In fact, IBM's cost of a data breach report estimates that employee training, cybersecurity training for your employees, can actually reduce the cost of a data breach or a data security incident by almost $250,000. That is substantial. And so we cannot stress enough, this is a huge control to have in place.
I think it's good to tell your team that hackers are using things like Worm GPT to write emails and messages that sound totally legitimate. You really can't rely on those things like spelling errors anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So what else could we do with artificial intelligence if it was, built for evil, which we totally have now? One of the things we can do is we can write our own malicious code. So if you've seen previous webinars that we've done on things like information stealers, we talk a lot of times about how things like your web browsers are a target because people save passwords in them, and a piece of malicious software can oftentimes go in and extract those passwords. So we just asked Worm GPT to write me a PowerShell script that can steal passwords from a web browser, and about 3 seconds later, we had that code there ready to go. All I would have to do is copy and paste this into a PowerShell window and hit go, and there we go. Now I can hijack passwords from any Google Chrome browser on a system. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. We could also do something like write ransomware. And this one, we wanted to test it out a little bit, so I asked the AI to write me ransomware using the Rust programming language. This is something that we've seen as a trend. A lot of attackers are moving towards non-standard programming languages like Rust or Go or NIM, mainly because antivirus has a really hard time detecting them. And sure enough, it went ahead and wrote me out ransomware in Rust. So we decided to take it a step further. We said, okay, take that ransomware and make this into a worm that can automatically spread through a computer system and encrypt all the files. And without hesitation, it went ahead and rewrote the code for me. So now I have a wormable ransomware written in a language that antivirus has a really hard time detecting that I can just basically copy out and deploy. It was pretty eye-opening.
And this is one of Darktrace's top predictions for 2024, that we're going to see a major worm that was written by AI. I would not be surprised if this occurred. I mean, it's so quick to create different versions.
Yeah, probably.
All right, moving on to voice cloning and deepfakes.
Yeah, this was a fun area of research to get into. Now we'll be going a little bit more in depth on this one, but one of the things that we've seen is a big push towards detection of artificially generated voices and videos, because AI engines are getting a lot better and a lot faster at creating these things. The FTC is offering a $25,000 prize for anyone who has a workable means of detecting AI-enabled voice cloning, especially over something like a telephone call. But it's not just voice that we're talking about now. We're also going into deepfakes, which are videos, which can again be very, very convincing. They can look and sound almost exactly like who they're trying to imitate. They can make them say really whatever they want to. And yeah, they're likely going to be a threat as we move forward in the technology advances. So let's level set really quick here for those of you who are not familiar with the term. What is a deepfake? A deepfake uses artificial intelligence to alter audio and video files. What it basically will do is superimpose an image or a video onto another video, but doing it with an artificial intelligence means that it can do this pretty much seamlessly. Very, very convincing. We're not going to see a lot of the same obvious indicators of a fake video that we would see before. There's also a really high potential for misuse here, especially, and we'll get to this near the end of the webinar, but when we're talking about things like politicians. And this is a big concern for not just in the United States, but a worldwide issue at this point. What happens if videos start coming out that show a trusted politician, somebody who leads a government, stating things that are completely untrue, and all of it's being generated by artificial intelligence? There's also things like defamation, there's scams and fraud. I mean, there's a lot of potential misuse for this.
One thing you may not know about Matt is he loves the Packers. And so for those of you who were with us last month, we showed you exactly how we created a fake Matt voice to say this.
The Detroit Lions are probably going to win the NFC North. Go Lions.
You were going to pay for that.
Doing great now, by the way. I didn't know anything about them before. So check it out if you want to see how we did that. But this is already causing issues. Scammers are already using this technology to clone someone's voice and say, oh, you know, hey, I have your son, he's in trouble, here's his voice. So check out last month's webinar if you want to hear more about voice cloning. And Matt, tell us a little bit about the video deepfakes that are starting to come out.
Yeah, video deepfakes are now again. There are some hilarious comedic examples of these, but there are a lot of areas that this could be potentially misused. One of the pieces of software that we found is called Deepface Lab. This is actually available free for anyone who wants to download and install it. And it can be used to change appearances in real time in videos. You can see one of the examples here. We have Mark Zuckerberg from his congressional hearing, but he's been replaced completely with data from Star Trek. And if you watch this video, I mean, the face is very convincing. It looks like Data actually speaking, but with Mark Zuckerberg's voice, and with a little bit of additional AI, they could change the voice on that one as well. Now, it's not all bad. I do want to point that out. There are a lot of legitimate uses for something like AI-generated video, and in the corporate space, where we're seeing a lot of this kind of technology used, are for things like training videos, for marketing, for advertising, for communications, and a lot more. If you are trying to create little snippet training videos for your employees and you don't have the budget to hire an entire acting crew and to script out and film and all of that, you can actually go in and just create an artificial intelligence avatar that will look realistic, will have a realistic voice, and all you have to do is type in what you want it to say, and the video will go ahead and create itself. One of the examples I like to point out here, and this is a company we've been looking into as our research project, is an organization called Synthesia. And they are by no means the only organization out there doing this. There are a lot of them. But Synthesia actually put together a pretty quick AI video tutorial, and all we had to do was type in what we wanted it to say. It brought up a pretty realistic looking avatar. The mouth movement, the eye movement, everything looked like it was supposed to, like the hair movement even looked normal. And it went ahead and read off everything that we were saying in a voice that matched the mannerisms and the appearance of the AI that we were looking at. Now, stay tuned. We're going to be digging into this a lot more. But deepfakes are not impossible to detect. So there's a few things that you can do to identify whether or not the video you're watching is actually real. Some of them come down to basically the what's it called, the uncanny valley philosophy, where things look human-like, but only to a certain extent, like enough that it makes you a little bit uncomfortable. So look for things like unnatural blinking, for off-kilter lip syncing, for weird flaws in the videos. Hand movement comes into play a lot of the times. The AI doesn't seem to know what people do with their hands. So you'll see that look a little bit strange. There's also audio problems. You'll hear audio artifacts in the background. You can digitally footprint videos now using public-private key encryption, which is pretty nice. And then there are some AI models that are in early development that can be used to detect whether a video has been generated by AI. So we'll kind of see where this goes as we progress.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. We're going to zip through our last couple threats. One of them is bring your own AI, BYOAI. So artificial intelligence is making all of us that use it more efficient. However, sometimes employers don't know that employees are using AI, and workers are bringing their own AI to work, which is creating new risks to confidentiality, integrity, and even potentially availability. So what is BYOAI? Just rolls off the tongue, huh? Things like where people are logging into their own ChatGPT accounts to do their work. Maybe it's not something provided by the company, but they want to be able to get things done quickly. And so they're effectively putting company information in there in a lot of cases in order to process it. This can be things like video recordings. We've heard a lot of reports of people taking Zoom recordings, getting transcript of those, uploading them. Things like stuff in internal memos or PowerPoint presentations or whatever, uploading those to AI. There's also tools like Bard and Microsoft Copilot that are actually pretty hard to block. So again, this is becoming an increasing risk, and if you don't have a policy against it, then assume that people either will or already are using it. Now, there have been many reports of hacked ChatGPT accounts. Matt, why don't you tell us about these articles you found?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we wanted to point out here because when people think like someone's ChatGPT account got hacked, they same with like social media, they really don't see that as a massive problem. But when we think about what people are doing with these AI engines, the loss of access to that account or the loss of the data that you have in that account can be pretty detrimental. If you're loading sensitive company information into your AI for things like meeting note summaries or for ideas towards new product launches, or if you're loading source code for code review or something like that, if I gain access to your account, oftentimes I can see everything that you've loaded in and all of the responses back to it. So all of that information that you thought was confidential is now in my hands. If that information is sensitive, if it contains PII, then you are in the same situation you'd be in if I broke into your network and stole it directly off your computer system. So we want to make sure that that is being addressed properly.
Yeah, so as a result, many companies have started to ban the use of ChatGPT or similar tools until they can really get their arms around it and figure out how to control it. We're also seeing the issue of shadow AI. So this was a study done in the UK where they evaluated whether people were using ChatGPT in ways that their manager was aware of or whether they weren't. And it turned out 30% of the time, their boss or manager was not aware that they were using ChatGPT. There's a significant risk of data exposure as well when you train these systems. There's always a risk that your data may come out again in ways that you don't expect. So Matt, tell us about the poem issue.
Yeah. So a security researcher was intentionally trying to basically glitch out ChatGPT. And it's not impossible to do. I mean, ChatGPT and other AI engines, they have a problem called hallucination, where they will either make things up, or the responses you get back are just not exactly what you were anticipating. But they told the AI engine to repeat the word poem forever. And it went on and started saying poem, 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 and then it glitched and started putting out information about training data that had been included in the artificial intelligence engine. This included names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, other things that were not anticipated to be in those answers and shouldn't be out there in the first place. But because they were able to essentially glitch out the AI, that information was then exposed. So we're also seeing lawsuits by major media companies about training data that's coming from things like popular media or other popular sources. So there's a lot that could potentially go haywire with these systems.
And this takes us to our second big Microsoft story of the day. Microsoft had released a sample set for AI research. So it was open source training data on GitHub. And in that process, they accidentally exposed 38 terabytes of additional private data, including backups of 2 employees' workstations. So Matt, how did this happen? And maybe first, what exactly was exposed?
Yeah, so the exposure here was significant. The exposed data included things that could potentially be used to extract sensitive personal data, including things like employee health information or anything else that an employee would have on their computer. This also had things like passwords, secret keys, 30,000 internal Teams messages between about 360 different Microsoft employees, and the source code for their AI applications. But what made this so kind of terrifying was the fact that the source code, the way that people could access the source code, gave them read and write privileges to that code. This means you could go in and you could do pretty much whatever you wanted to. So this is basically how it happened. Microsoft was publishing out their open source AI data, and they were using what's called a SAS token URL. And for those of you who have watched our webinars on cloud web app security, a token is basically just like a key that, or it's like a hall pass that's signed by the principal. It's what allows you to enter into a specific area of a software application or service. It's how the system verifies that you are who you say you are and that you have the permissions to access that information. In this case, the token that they used was what's called overly permissive. And we hinted at this a little bit earlier. Way too broad of a permission set applied to it, meaning it could access the storage container that had that OpenAI source data, but it could also access everything else in that storage container. And this is where they got into things like those Teams messages, the employee workstation backups, passwords, private keys, source code, all of this. And it was, thankfully, it was a research organization that discovered that this was available. They notified Microsoft immediately, they got it taken back down. But if someone with ill intentions had gotten access to it, there's a lot that they could have done. Again, if you want to learn more about this, about tokens or about cloud security or anything like that, check out our webinar from September of this year, I believe, Cloud and Web App Security. There's a YouTube link right there on the screen. We go into this in a little bit more detail. But what we want to point out here is that this was more than a data leak. With that same read-write access, an attacker could do things like inject malicious code. They could alter responses or results, modify the code to return obscene content, or they could have just sabotaged the entire project. So this could have been potentially devastating had it gone differently.
There's been a lot of movement on regulations this year, and we expect to see continued movement in 2024. One that made the news recently was in New York, a clinic was required to not just pay a $450,000 fine, but they were required to spend $1.2 million on security as part of their settlement after a ransomware attack. So what happened? In 2021, they were hit with a cyber extortion attack. And as part of that, the criminals stole personal information for anywhere between 195 to 235,000 patients. And the initial entry was a video camera system that unfortunately was misconfigured. The credentials had not been changed for 11 years. There was a previous IT vendor that was no longer managing it, but their credentials were left in there. So if that sounds familiar, of course, it's because that kind of thing happens all the time. It's that dusty old system that hasn't been checked. And we really need to be looking at identity and access management, getting rid of those old accounts. So when they did an investigation, they found out, number one, that the hospital's last risk assessment was in 2017. There were multiple HIPAA violations. And Matt, I know there were some incident response flaws as well. Do you want to speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, there were some just fundamental problems that the healthcare organization had when they responded. They tried to automatically restore workstations instead of preserving evidence, which is one of the reasons why there's that big range in how many people's information may have been stolen. They don't actually know for a fact, so they had to estimate on the high end because they rolled over most of that data during the recovery process. And this is just one of many incident response failures that popped up.
Yeah, and so one big takeaway here is just to make sure that your incident response planning and testing is up to snuff. This is something that is being addressed in several major regulators. So your response matters, and your ability to figure out exactly what happened and report on it matters as well. Because if you know something bad happened, but you can't say exactly what, that really raises a red flag. So make sure when you update your incident response plans, you're including SaaS and cloud breaches. You're making sure that your incident responders have access to your list of cloud providers and know how to contact their incident response teams. There's a lot of details. If you have any questions about what should be in your incident response policy, we do a lot of them, so feel free to drop us a line. I'm on LinkedIn. That might be the easiest way to get a hold of me. Conduct tabletop exercises. You can try to plan for everything, but really doing a tabletop exercise is so valuable because it shows what happens when the rubber hits the road. And then another thing that they pointed out, that the regulators pointed out, was that there needed to be qualified information security leadership. Your information security program starts with qualified leadership. And this is another trend that we're seeing echoed by multiple regulators. So the healthcare system was required to appoint a qualified employee to implement, maintain, and monitor the information security program. And they provided some background on, what kind of experience and qualifications that person should have, because everything else will flow from having the right leadership. So you can look for things like experience, familiarity with controls frameworks. Keep in mind, for those of you that are small to mid-sized organizations, it doesn't need to be a full-time job. You can outsource, you can have a fractional CISO come in and advise your team. So I think that's a good cost-effective way to handle it if you're a small to mid-sized organization, or if you have somebody that you want to grow into a CISO, but you feel like they need some guidance and coaching. Matt, I know PwC just came out with a new report and commented on regulatory trends for the year, correct?
Yeah, this is a big driver in organizations' future revenue growth as they see. And there were a couple things that we found interesting about this. One of them obviously was going to be new mandatory reporting on incidents. And we've seen a lot of this come out. We saw it with MGM, we've seen it with Microsoft, we've seen it with other publicly traded organizations, but that mandatory reporting is huge. The other one that we're seeing though on top of that is mandatory reporting of your cyber risk management strategy and governance. Meaning you are in some industries, you are required to actually tell business partners or tell the government how exactly you plan to maintain your cybersecurity program, what your safeguards are, who your people are, what their qualifications are, and a lot more. And we'll likely see private industry move this way as far as business agreements goes, or contracts or things like that. So yeah, stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, all of this is just setting new standards. So as we know, earlier this year, the SEC came out with new incident reporting guidance, and they just clarified that in December, saying that you need to report if, quote, there's a substantial likelihood that a reasonable shareholder would consider it important. So again, this is just setting a new standard for our industry. So everybody, even those that aren't SEC regulated, should keep an eye on it. And then here's some upcoming dates that you may all want to watch. On March 31st, there's going to be a new version of PCI DSS that comes out, PCI DSS 4.0, for those of you that process payment cards. May 13th, there will be new FTC data breach reporting rules, so keep your eyes peeled for that. In June, the SEC will be coming out with reporting rules for smaller companies. And then by July 1st, we expect to see three new state data privacy laws. Is this when they're going into effect, Matt?
Yeah, this is when they go into effect, and these will be very similar to California's consumer protection and New York's SHIELD laws. So very, very strict data protection policies.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to go into our final section on hacktivism and geopolitical threats. So we know that geopolitical issues can increase risk. And we've seen this over the years with attacks on the Ukraine. For example, in 2016, NotPetya became what Wired magazine called the most devastating cybersecurity attack in history. The estimated losses were $10 billion. And this started off, we believe, as an attack by Russia on the Ukraine. So they actually broke into the #1 tax software provider in the Ukraine. It was very much like SolarWinds. Like they got into a backdoor, they were able to embed a backdoor into that tax software, and that got pushed out to many organizations all throughout the Ukraine. And then when they were ready, boom, they pushed wiping malware out. So we are really lucky that we caught SolarWinds in time, because I wouldn't be surprised if they had done something similar to that. In the meantime, we are seeing similar attacks. Oh, and by the way, this spread, the problem was it spread beyond the Ukraine. Once you got that malware out, boom, FedEx was sucked into it. Mandala's, the Oreo manufacturer, was hit by it. Merck, many other major organizations that are not Ukrainian companies were affected. So when the war in the Ukraine started, we started to see wiping malware come out, which was very concerning, not just for the Ukraine, but also for organizations around the world. And now we're seeing ongoing cyber warfare. And again, everyone could get hit by the shrapnel from this. Matt, do you want to tell us what happened with the largest telco provider in the Ukraine?
Sure. Yeah. So this is Kyivstar. This is one of the or the largest telco provider in the Ukraine. A Russian hacker group called the Salt Sepik hackers, who claim to be nation state affiliated. We don't actually have verification of that, but they were able to break into the network, we assume, back in May of 2023, and then they lurked in the network for a while until a critical point in the conflict came up. And then they went through and just annihilated the entire telco provider. This wasn't ransomware. This was straight up data wiping and destruction. So they claim to have destroyed over 10,000 computers, more than 4,000 servers, all of their cloud storage and backup systems, pretty much everything wiped out. And this left about 25 million people inside of the Ukraine with no internet access whatsoever, no mobile service, no home internet, no anything else like that. And if you're relying on that kind of data flow for information about what's going on around you, that can be a pretty big problem. Now, they did this because they claimed that Kyivstar was supporting the Ukrainian military. Turned out that wasn't the case. So they really just went after consumer infrastructure at this point. But this is part of the back and forth that we see when these geopolitical conflicts come up. And you can see a few examples right here. The Ukrainian military says it hacked Russia's federal tax agency. Russia came back and deployed a new strain of malware across the Ukraine. A pro-Ukrainian hacker group has breached a large internet service provider in Russia because of that attack against Kyivstar. So we'll likely see this kind of going as the conflict progresses.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. In the Middle East, of course, we're also on heightened alert. Back in the fall, the FBI's director warned everyone that there are threats to Americans coming out of the Middle East because of the conflict that's happening there. And then you can see, Matt, what was this recent incident? There was a disruption of gas stations across Iran, is that right?
Yeah, Iran is claiming that Israel is responsible for a disruption of their fuel infrastructure. The Cyber Tufan hacktivist group has leaked personal information on a bunch of different Israeli organizations. So again, we're still seeing fallout that's expanding outside of the conflict between these two.
Cyber warfare is ongoing. All right, in the United States, expect to see election security issues, and these may range from straight up hacking to deep fakes, which are almost certainly going to be occurring. There was just a robocall. Matt, do you want to fill us in on this one?
Yeah, so this was a robocall that went out ahead of the New Hampshire primary that supposedly was from Joe Biden, and it sounded like Joe Biden, and the cadence was fairly close to it. I've heard the recording; it was a pretty good deepfake, but it was detectable. But it was Biden telling Democratic voters that they didn't need to go out and didn't need to vote in the primaries or any of the upcoming elections because everything had already been taken care of. This was a voter suppression attempt that was unleashed against a very specific population. And something like this, robocalls, we all know, are very, very common. Add in artificial intelligence and deepfakes on the back end of that, and this can be a big issue. We also need to be very careful about the hardware and software that's being used to maintain the security of our election, because they are absolutely going to be targets by hackers. I'm not going to say that these are purely politically motivated hackers. It could be ransomware operators. It could be any number of different groups. But the fact that we rely on digital infrastructure for our elections means that they will be a target. So we just need to be very careful about that. If you're maintaining digital equipment, just make sure you're following all of your best practices and keeping your information secure. Really what it comes down to.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so we talked about the cloud concentration risks that are occurring. Software vulnerabilities are going to continue to be a major problem. Evil AI, or in other words, AI getting used for evil purposes. BYOAI, bring your own AI, is also a problem. It's causing a risk of data leaks and data integrity. We have to worry about, well, we have to worry about hacktivism and geopolitical threats. And then there's a trend, not a threat, of evolving regulations that all of us need to stay aware of. So we've also provided you with a list of the top security controls of 2024. It is also on our website. Check it out, just released today, really excited. It starts with data and asset inventory. I'm excited that that has been moved into first place. And then we continue with really the top issues. Strong multi-factor authentication is a must. Endpoint protection, cybersecurity training and awareness, identity and access management. Make sure you're going through those old accounts. Scanning and vulnerability management, so you're protecting yourself against those ongoing software vulnerabilities. Review your cloud configuration. We've been working with our clients a ton on that recently. Make sure you're doing penetration testing so you catch the things that the automated scanners can't catch. Incident response testing and training so that you can respond effectively and also demonstrate that you're responding effectively. That's going to be more and more important for regulatory purposes. Advanced backups, we didn't get into that today, but for the purposes of defending against ransomware, it's key. Supplier risk management, that is a new control this year that of course we are adding because it's look at MOVEit. It's so critical to understand who your suppliers are and to manage your risk. And finally, everything starts with qualified security leadership. So make sure that your security program starts at the top and either you have someone full-time in place or you're relying on a virtual CISO to advise your team so that you can make sure you have a strong security posture. Feel free to drop us a line at info@lmgsecurity.com. Matt and I are also both on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with us and give us a shout out. So thanks so much, Sarah. I'll turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you, Sherry and Matt. Once again, this is Sarah with LMG Security. We'd like to thank everyone who attended. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.